Hello and welcome to Molosser, a unique YouTube channel where you'll find tons of interesting and unique canine content. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and feel free to leave a comment on any of our videos.
The Cane Garouf, also known as Partour and Alp Mastiff, is an old working dog from the Italian Alps in northwest Italy, more precisely from the area of Piemonte, near Gran Paradiso Park, close to the French and Swiss border. The exact origin of the Cane Garouf is not known, but it has been used as a livestock guardian for centuries in the northern Italian mountain region. Nowadays the Cane Garouf is highly endangered, with probably not more than 20 specimens left. Because of the modernization of agricultural work and farming, most farmers no longer let their livestock graze in the mountains, and therefore the guardian dog is no longer needed to protect the herd from wolves and other predators. As a result of this, the breeding of the flock guardian dog in the area is not continued by most of the farmers that earlier always kept some Partours as working dogs. Without a rescue project or some dedicated breeders, the old flock guardian of the Italian Alps will soon face extinction. As the observant reader has noticed, the area where the Cane Garouf comes from is not far from the Great St. Bernard Pass, and we can assume that the St. Bernard and the Cane Garouf has some kind of relationship. My guess is that the Cane Garouf was related to the early St. Bernard, before the infusion of the Newfoundland and Pyrenean dogs. Mr. Richardson wrote in 1851 that the monastery in St. Bernard imported British Mastiffs in 1660, and they kept them as watchdogs. After a terrible plague, the number of these dogs were heavily reduced and the monks were forced to cross the remaining dogs with long-haired Italian and Pyrenean dogs, later also other breeds. Which were these long-haired Italian dogs that Mr. Richardson talks about? Would it not be the easiest choice to get dogs from right across the border to use in the breeding at the monastery? Based on the info, I believe that the Cane Garouf was used in the breeding of the early St. Bernard dog. Another point that supports this is that Salvatore Rosa painted, around 1690, two dogs from the hospice, and they were described as cowherd's cowherds dogs. In other words, these dogs had the same livestock guardian function as the Cane Garouf and were not used as rescue dogs at that point in time. It is also interesting to look closer at Sir Edwin Landseer's famous painting of the Alpine Mastiff, which can be seen below. The pictured dog has been believed to be a St. Bernard, but it looks much more like the Cane Garouf. Sir Edwin Landseer also made other paintings, some called Alpine Mastiffs and some called St. Bernard. You can find two such paintings by clicking here. Wynne lists several paintings by Sir Landseer in his 1886 book The History of the Mastiff, and he wrote, "It is worthy of remark that the Alpine Mastiffs drawn by Sir E. Landseer are generally so termed. Is it possible that Sir Landseer painted a Cane Garouf instead of a dog from the monastery? Is it possible that some Cane Garoufs was imported to England in the 1800s as Alpine Mastiffs? Yes, there is in fact pieces of evidence on this, and this is at the same time evidence on the existence of the Cane Garouf in earlier times." Mr. Wynne writes in his 1886 book, in the chapter of the Alpine Mastiff, St. Bernard, "We also find another breed closely resembling the Spanish Mastiff existing in the Alps, and owing to the similarity in type, there is every reason to believe that old Alpine Mastiff was identical with the Alan, and probably derived from Spain." Col H. Smith mentions this second closer and shorter-haired variety and gives a colored plate of one of them. This dog, named Bass, belonged to Sir Thomas Dock Lauder, having been brought from the Great St. Bernard in 1837, and his portrait was taken by Stewart between that year and June 1839. The colored plate, number 6, shows an animal agreeing in nearly every particular with the Spanish Mastiff I saw at Bilgeorges, about 1863, except the color of the patches on the head and ears, which are tan instead of black, otherwise both were nearly all white in color. The head is massive, muzzle blunt and truncated, lips pendulous, ears medium-sized and pendulous, barrel well-rounded, limbs very ponderous, stern carried up. The dog resembles a vast white Mastiff, with stop well defined, but somewhat longer in the head than the English variety should be. It should be mentioned that Wynne gives other references in the book to Spanish Mastiffs, Spanish Bull Mastiffs and the Alano. It can be hard to know if Wynne in each case talks about a Maston or an Alano, but out of the description he gives of the dogs we can understand which of the two he is referring to. Considering the colors of the St. Bernard, we must understand that there was a larger variety of mountain dogs in the Alps, both at the Swiss and the Italian side of the border. Wynne writes further in his book, in 1829 a vast light brindle dog of the old Alpine Mastiff breed, named Lammy, was brought from the convent of Great St. Bernard, and exhibited in London and Liverpool as the largest dog in England. Judging by this, it can be believed that the monastery of Saint Bernard acquired dogs from the area to be used in their breeding, and did not keep their line pure, so to speak. It has also been suggested that Lammy not was an Alpine Mastiff at all, but a Great Dane, and that the Alpine Mastiff name was used to acquire a higher amount of money for the dog. Wynne gives further reference to the Italian dogs. Between that year and 1840, Couches, alias Turk, a reputed Alpine Mastiff, was brought over from Italy. He was red smut, and first owned by. It is especially interesting to note the color, as it is a color still found in the Cane Garouf. According to the picture, it looks like Couches was a short-haired dog, and if he really came from the Alps or further south in Italy, we'll probably never know. Couches was a reputed fighting dog, always victorious, and Wynne describes his fighting ability as unmatchable. Couches' height was 30 inches, 72 centimeters, and he weighed 130 pounds, 59 kilograms. He was short-muzzled, broad-skulled, and Wynne believed that he had a cross of Spanish Bulldog in him. Wynne mentions nothing of the Italian Mastiffs, Pre-Mastino and Cane Corso, in his book, so we can assume that he simply did not know about the existence of these breeds. Since Wynne lived his adult life much later than the time of Couches, he only studied the dog by paintings, or more correct, photos of a copy of an oil painting of Couches, as Wynne admits himself in his book. It is possible that Couches was a cross between the Alpine Mastiff, Cane Garouf, and an Italian Mastiff, Mastino, Cane Corso, and that his looks came from such a cross and not, as Wynne suggests, from the Spanish Bulldog, but not necessarily so. If we study the muzzle of the Cane Garouf pictured with the Danish actress Brigitte Nielsen, we will not find a longer muzzle, and the coat of the present-day specimens is also short, thick and double, but short, as we also can find in the specimens painted by Sir Edwin Landseer. Also, James Watson give the subject of St. Bernard versus Alpine Mastiff quite a lot of space in his 1905 book, The Dog Book. Watson writes in his chapter of the St. Bernard, that there was another variety of dog, in Switzerland at that time is absolutely certain. Watson writes further, this other Swiss dog became known in England as the Alpine Mastiff, occasionally called the Alpine Spaniel, and we think he was much like a Leonberger. Further, one of these Alpine Mastiffs was brought to England in 1815 and is always referred to as the Leesham Castle Mastiff. Wynne gives us information about an etching of this dog by Thomas Landseer from a drawing in possession of Mr. J.S. Morgan, made in 1815. What Watson is referring to is the above pictured Alpine Mastiff, which supports my statement that the 1825 engraving looks more like a Cane Garouf than a St. Bernard, since the 1825 version clearly is based on the 1815 painting. Watson writes further about Sir Edwin Landseer. He also painted a good many dogs which were named St. Bernard, and it is very clear that to him the Alpine Mastiff was a different dog. The Natural History Museum of Bern gives the following description of the origin of the St. Bernard dog. The direct ancestors of the St. Bernard were the large farm dog which was widely spread across the region. Within a few generations after the establishment of the ideal type, they were bred into the present-day breed. Also, this does in fact support my conclusion, given below. The conclusion must be that the Cane Garouf is an older breed than the St. Bernard, and that it is one of the breeds that have played an active role in the foundation of the modern St. Bernard. We must also assume that the breed now known as Cane Garouf, which in fact still is named Alp Mastiff by some, did not live in a restricted range in northern Italy in earlier times, but also could be found in the regions north of Italy, being the true Alpine Mastiff carrying out his livestock guardian duties in the mountains, while the St. Bernard should be regarded as the hospice, monastery dogs.
If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel.